Do you ever get home in the evening, put your feet up, and find yourself overwhelmed with anxiety and feelings of hopelessness when watching the news? There's too many of these people, there's not enough of these people. We're not saying global destruction is happening, but what we are saying is the preamble is happening. The economy is doomed, robots will take your job, everyone you've ever trusted is a bastard. It might be because the news is increasingly sensationalised. I guess it could be lots of other things too. I'm not your therapist. Sensationalism is a usually intentional telling of a news story in a way that overhypes it, in a way that exaggerates its broader importance. Often it's conflated with bias. However, I think increasingly news outlets exist that are sensationalist but don't necessarily have bias because they're more interested in the clicks, in the traffic, than they are in pushing opinion. Sensationalism has been around for a long time, longer than modern journalism if you think of all the peddlers of doom that there've been. Chroniclers and contemporary writers have sensationalised real accounts of historical events since ancient times, to the point where it's sometimes hard to be sure exactly what happened in history because all the sources are biased or sensationalist in some way. Which kind of sounds like today, although I'm sure nowadays most of the blurs don't come with the whats, but with the whys, and the what things mean. Sensationalist contemporary accounts of things that have happened hundreds of years ago are often sensationalised because, of course, the author has an agenda, but also because it can make things more entertaining. Since the birth of news as a business, there's always been an impetus to make current events buyable. What do you mean it's a slow news day? There's no such thing. Is it snowing? What does that mean for British infrastructure? Is it a sign from God? Are these the end times? But now, it's only a small amount of people who pay for the news. More likely you pay with your time. You click a link. The dominance of ads in online news spaces has come to a head in recent years, and often takes the form of what in print media would be called puff pieces, ads designed to look and possibly even read like real news. With a newspaper, an issue sold is a considerable chunk of change more than would be made from a single click. But newspapers need regular readers, and they gain them from either leaning a certain way and pandering to their audience, or through actual journalism and building a reputation for reliable reporting. A term that could make a grown man queasy. Not reading the news? Finding primary sources? Oh. With many websites, YouTube videos, and even newspapers, the click is all they want, because their style of news is so ubiquitous, and so much more focused on the headline than the copy. That's the why then, for profit in some form or to push bias, or just to compete with the other outlets. Often those things go hand in hand. So, what does news sensationalism look like now? Well, I think a lot of it comes from the way that headlines are written. Here's a really obvious example. Abraham Lincoln was a woman! ! I mean, come on! Everyone knows that. It's the fakest beard in history. A slightly more directed example might be this headline. Dan Coates may well have said something about danger signs. The article may very well be true, but as in this example from the Mirror, the headline uses emotional language. Someone may well have spoken out about cyber attacks. They may well be an expert, and those cyber attacks may well be very dangerous. But I, as the reader, will decide how chilled I am. Thank you very much. Here's another example. What's really the story here? An attempted arsonist failed to burn down a building. Did he say something racist? Yes, it seems so. The headline isn't incorrect, but it is sensationalist. Now I know these examples are quite subtle. They're not InfoWars reporting that the Democrats plan to repeal the First Amendment, but there's the danger. A headline that is obviously bullshit can easily be dismissed, and is nowhere near as insidious as a factually correct headline that contains a little bit of attitude too. Sensationalism in headlines stems from the pursuit of readership. Sensationalism after the headline is usually a good indicator of bias. Sensationalized headlines are about attracting readership. Sensationalist content is about informing opinion. Of course, let's be honest, most news isn't read. It's the headlines that are skimmed over. No one has enough time to read all the news, and that's why headlines, whether they be factually accurate or not, still inform us, and that's why they can be dangerous when they're sensationalist. Sensationalist headlines and titles often, although not always, or with that caveat, lead to sensationalized content. Again, copy or video that might well be 100% factually accurate, but is presented in a razzly-dazzly way or as some sort of prophetic message from the media gods. Here's an example of what I mean, using the same music as BBC News. Good evening. A bomb attack in a distant land has killed many people, and was perpetrated by a group whose motives, ideology, and history would be very difficult to go into here. Today marks the 10th anniversary of something awful that happened, as does every day. A grey-eyed politician said something today that may contradict something they said 18 months ago. Government bean counters say too many people are smoking or eating too much or worrying excessively. Could a healthcare crisis be on the way? We'll be talking to a dietitian, child's healthcare expert, and a shill for the sugar lobby, and we'll be giving them all equal weight, despite obvious conflict of interest. The music, especially the tempo, isn't just incidental background music, it informs how you feel, generally, and about the stories on offer. So too it matters how things are said. The prince's wife has not been seen without a hat in 36 hours. The BBC, stiffer than most US news, nevertheless uses this music, which is a little extreme, to create a sense of urgency, but it's become so normal that the idea of someone just sitting in a silent studio, giving a brief account of notable events, with the meticulous dispassion of unbiased, honest reporting, seems as crazy as the confusing cross between reporting and analysis. CNN is especially guilty of this. They have this thing where they like their anchors reading the news, but also commenting on it simultaneously.
It's extraordinary that the most powerful leader in the world publicly is claiming in front of the Russian president that all he can do is ask the question of Vladimir Putin if he meddled. That's not all he can do. He can actually confront Vladimir Putin. He can stand up to Vladimir Putin.
I'm interested in Anders Cooper's analysis, but not while he's telling me what just happened. Isn't that the definition of bias? Isn't having two people do those two things on the same network a problem? What I think it does is put unfair weight on the news. The journalist cares about it so much. How interesting. It must be important. But the compounding of reporting and opinion is confusing, and it's done for the entertainment share, the lion's share of infotainment, and to persuade, and more persuasive and dramatised news are becoming one. Listen to this clip from Russia Today and you'll hear how something factual, lack of conclusive evidence, is presented with opinionated language.
Not only does the Department of Justice fail to provide any conclusive evidence linking the Kremlin to the alleged crime, it actually admits that the supposed conspiracy did not affect the vote count or the election, so a confrontation with Putin over meddling was clearly the desired result.
Again, there's nothing wrong with opinionated analysis, and surely we'd expect nothing more of the ever-cringy Russia Today, but its conflation here with fact is what much better publications are doing too. Mainstream media. If you want to know why people don't trust you, start here. Separate reporting and analysis. Have a reporter deliver the news to me without trying to persuade me. Honestly, I know there's this secret belief in the media that everyone's too stupid to consume information if it's presented in a dry, factual way, but they're not. And it's your integrity. Anyway, here's a funny picture, please keep watching. There'll be some partisan voices on in a minute to scream their opinion at you over and over. Because there's much more competition for online traffic, places like the BBC, which were much more reserved in their handling of the news in the past, have become self-relating. Sure, they may have juicy, sexy bullshit headlines, but our reporters have been to hell and back.
Then you can call yourself the most trusted brand in news. Hello, I'm Katty Kay, this is BBC.
Into the storm, into the chaos, into the heartbreak.
Really down to the minute.
We're going to be fearless, we're going to be fair.
Whether it's 4 a.m. or midnight, we're there.
Journalists often are very brave, especially if they happen to be Russian, especially if they don't live in a bungalow. But telling me this over and over doesn't enhance your journalism. Better to send a van to pointlessly tell me the news from a location where something that was happening, but is no longer happening, all to look a little more interesting, while the leg workers are being squeezed and copy standards deteriorate. What a time to be alive! But really, every time has been a time to be alive. I'm sure the 1730s were extremely important to people both in the 1730s and probably in the 1740s and 50s. But they don't seem so important now, do they? There are more contemporary examples. When's the last time ISIS were a major story? Remember Ebola? Remember how that was going to wash over Europe and America like a black plague? Remember the volunteer nurse who risked her life to save those of strangers, who was then treated as a traitor by a hysterical press who seemed at times to almost want an outbreak? That's not to say those things don't matter, but do they matter as much as we were told that they mattered? There always has to be some foe, some hurricane, some evil, something to worry about, a housing crisis, a health crisis, some boogeyman for the media to latch onto and help sell copy. The Rapture, but only for people who own short-haired dogs. With the benefit of hindsight, it's very easy to fall into the trap of thinking that progression of events is obvious. What are you doing, Mr. Chamberlain? Can't you see that this ridiculous man is a terrible racist and will do awful things in the next 3 to 7 years? I wonder if some influence on the news becoming a gaudy feedback-looping megaphone might be that comparatively, these are the good times. In centurial terms, these are the decades of peace that historically occur between things happening. I'd like to say that the modern news media wouldn't sensationalise World War I, but I think they probably would, because I think it's probably now their default state. It certainly happened at the time, but now I'd argue that when war is sensationalised, it's not necessarily for propaganda, although sometimes, but more often for circulation. Of course, propaganda, which is a whole other topic, is a major factor in news sensationalism. Propaganda, as I'll discuss in that video, when I make it, is a term that you could perhaps slap on anything intended for public consumption. A better term, perhaps, for more general use, would be bias. Remember Rachel Maddow's bombshell on Trump? Where do you think that came from? Bias.
We've got some significant breaking news tonight. What I have here is a copy of Donald Trump's tax returns. We have his federal tax return. Was there a huge damning bombshell in these tax returns? No, the bombshell here is that some of his tax returns have been made public.
Be sure to tune into Rachel's next special report, Wolf Wolf, an exclusive look at what the boy cried.
All the shock revelations, all the fluff videos, all the panels of people relentlessly going through what-if scenarios, like shills discussing what Deadpool's costume is going to look like in a film that hasn't been written, of which I know nothing. This is how you make people watch the news, by making everything into a big deal, yet often leaving only enough space to superficially report on it. That's how tabloids do it too, all oh my god headline and whatever copy. How many people watch the news almost constantly in the run-up to Trump being elected? I know I did, and what did I learn? Pretty much nothing other than appeals to emotion can make you a lot of money if you can get on the news circuit, and there's never not a good time to watch a commercial. Take it away, YouTube. You thought I put an ad there, didn't you? F*** that. As a final note, what makes the march toward partisan hooting mixed with entertainment so bizarre is that a large part of the public are clearly unhappy about it. Yes, discontent comes from bias, but bias and sensationalism go hand in hand. Surely lack of public trust can't be healed with condescension. I'd have thought. Maybe. I think I should say at this point that real, reputable, journalistic outlets do still exist, although perhaps they are more rare than ever. There's a bias chart here someone made featuring some of the major news outlets. I'm not sure how scientific it is, or even if bias and reporting can be measured scientifically, but I think it seems pretty fair. Reuters especially offers the least spiced international news that I can find. I like my news like I like my cornflakes, dry and covered with truth, and milk. The link is in the description. Worth mentioning too, I think, are both 24-hour rolling news and the rise of personality-led news. Neither of these necessarily make the news sensationalized. They could probably exist in some alternate universe where the news isn't sensationalized and where cars drive people. What Always On News does in our universe is only increase the clamour for dramatisation and prevent compartmentalising news in instalments. Instead of daily updates to the world situation, we're almost encouraged to get alerts and keep an eye on Twitter, in case, I don't know, CNN calls and wants an interview, and how embarrassing it all would be if we hadn't seen Wolf Blitzer's latest Facebook post. And, not to get too far into the shiny-faced anchoring here, because that belongs in my inevitable video about celebrities, do we need recognisable faces to read as the news? No. Anyway, that's how the news is sensationalised. Business over journalism and an ever-decreasing market share has led to the prevalence of infotainment, which is more or less what this is, except I'm not labelling it breaking news. Infotainment has led to the dilution of standards, the mixing of fact and opinion at once reputable media outlets, and journalists competing to let us know what they really think, whilst labelling counter-opinion as political attack. Sensationalism leads to anger, anger leads to confusion, and confusion leads to InfoWars. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like or something. See you next time.
What is for credit? I don't know what that means, to play us out. What does that mean? Fuck it. There's no words on it. Fuck it. We'll do it live. Fuck it. I've never seen that. Fucking thing sucks. There's no